Welcome to the scenery farm. I'm showing here on this door that the face of this door is wider than the back of this door, the outward face of it, because all doors, when they swing, should be tapered to allow the so that they won't hit the jamb as they swing closed, and also so that the hinges don't overly bind on themselves when the door closes. There's a little bit of a sliver of a wedge of open still left in the hinge. This is a torsion box flush slab door. And the torsion box is just basically it's got 6 sides and it was put together with a bunch of glue, and so that's what gives it its rigidity. But these slab doors, or these flush doors, are essentially hollow core doors. Um, for the most part, they have hardboard HDF, or commonly in my world we call it masonite, and, even though that's a brand name, front and back. And then it's got a soft wood perimeter, which is the frame, and then it's got a couple extra blocks where the handle would be. And I'm marking out the opening that I eventually want here on this door that I'm going to cut out. Now, what I have underneath the door are some sticks that I just kind of put under a bunch of stuff when I cut it, so that I don't destroy the bench. And yeah, as long as it's flat timber, you'll be fine. And I have those marks there, and what I'm doing is I'm taking my skill saw and I'm just doing a drop cut inside of the lines. This is a 20-inch square opening, and I have a rough blade on the saw, and I line up the blade as I drop it in, and I'm leaving about 1/8 of an inch left on the inside of the opening, and I go around the door and I cut all of that. You got to make sure that if you're going to do this, that the blade and the thickness of the door and the blocks don't mean, like, all those measurements together don't mean that you're actually bottoming out on the table of your bench. And that's just me. I had a poor lineup. I'm going again. So this is actually floating above the bench top by about 1/4 of an inch as I'm cutting. And I just back it up very slowly up to the opening, and I go forward, and I stop about 1/4 inch away from the, or 1/8 inch away from the vertical line there on the door. You could, like, this is not the only way to do this, and by no means is this a definitive video on how you put windows and doors, but it's just one way that I do it for things, and I thought you might like it. Essentially, I would I would never do a drop cut into a serious piece of wood like this and expect anywhere near a clean cut, and I have to be real careful not to get kickback. But essentially, I'm cutting through 2 layers of 1/8 inch meso, and mostly hollow interior. I'll show you there's some cardboard inside the door to give it rigidity, but there's very little of it. There's not a heck of a lot in these doors. So I'm pulling the guard back and I'm doing my cut, and I feel very comfortable doing this cut. But again, it's a comfort level thing, and if it's not your bag, if you've never done a drop cut, don't do it, right? Drill a hole with a drill in each corner and jigsaw it out, which I did on my smaller windows, on the doors that had smaller windows for this project. So once I'm there, the next thing I do is I take the boards and I pull them out so they're overhanging the side of the bench, and then I bring my door up, and those boards are kind of in the center of the window away from the corners, because as I cut this, as I overhang the bench, essentially that window's just going to fall to the floor. So I'm giving it some support with those boards, and I'm just finishing off the cuts. Now, you got to be careful to get all the way through, because sometimes when the jigsaw blade is in its retract position, it actually won't bottom out on the bottom piece of masonite on the door. And if that's the case, the second you turn it on, the jigsaw will pop up and it'll push its way away from the door, which then, badness can ensue. So you got to be careful and make sure that you're actually in the groove in the slot, and that you're back enough from the corner that you're not over top of the kerf that hasn't gone all the way to the corner. Because when the circular saw blade does its cut, I'm knowing that I'm cutting a longer line on the top of the door than the bottom of the door. And this is what the jigsaw is finishing up. Now, you can see on the interior there is some stuff. Essentially, it's like cardboard between the two faces of the doors. And the next step here is, I mean, if it's a single piece of cardboard, you can kind of just push it with your fingers and get it out of the way. But if it's a clump like this dude here is a clump, you gotta kind of cut it top and bottom. And once you cut it top and bottom, you can push it out of the way. What you want is for it to be at least 3/4 of an inch away from the open end on the door. Now, I haven't compromised the flatness of this door by doing this because there's still enough skin on the top and bottom of this door and the faces of the door, and I haven't broken or cut away any of the frame on the perimeter of the door. If you do that, if anybody's ever seen a hollow core door that, say, the bottom or the top has been cut off, or the sheet, for whatever reason, the face has come a bit loose, it flops around all over the place because this thing gets its strength from having 6 pieces all adhered together. And once you compromise that, you're done. But for this, I don't really have to worry in the short term while I'm working on this about compromising the door. I wouldn't stick it on stage without doing the next steps, but so far I haven't really compromised it to be worked on. And the rest of this and how I put the window in. This is one type of solution to needing a door with a window. This has all the cardboard pushed back. These are some rips of pine I've done at 1 1/8 because that's the distance, the inside distance between the two pieces of masonite there. And the opening on this is 20 inches square. Now I've cut 2 pieces at 20 inch by 3/4 by 1 1/8, and I've cut 2 pieces at 21.5-ish. I mean, it doesn't really matter, the 21.5, it's just bigger than 20, and it gives me some wiggle room, 1.5 inches left to right kind of play. But the 20-inch dimension, it does matter. Keeping in mind, this opening is a rough opening, so it's actually smaller than 20 by 20, and it's irregular. It's not very clean. I'm putting some screws into the face of these boards, because as I slide them between the pieces of masonite, I need to be able to grab onto them. So I don't want to glue both sides of the boards, but I need glue on both sides of the boards. So I glue the underside, or the bottom face, in there, a nice healthy bit of glue, and then I glue the top. I mean, I could glue the top and bottom, but I just chose not to. I don't know why I didn't smooth out the glue on that one, which I typically do. I guess I'm not thinking about it. And now I just line up the faces with those pencil lines. And this one is the longer one. This is the 21.5. And as long as I'm over the line on the left and the right side, it'll be fine. I have a 23 gauge, or 20, that's a 21 gauge pinner, so it has a head on it, and I'm using 7/8 pins, and I set the pressure and the depth gauge on it so that the pins go just to the face of the masonite. I'm thinking, all right, I want to put this one in now. What am I doing? Okay, super genius, figure it out. And then I do my glue on the bottom. And this is the 20-inch piece. And so it's going to go butt up against the top of the inside one. And it is super important to glue these pieces in place. At the end of the day, it's the glue that's going to hold it. And the pins are just there to kind of clamp it in place. I can use the screws as leverage to bring it up and down and in and out. And I've pinned one end there. And there's a bit of residue, some cardboard residue, still on the inside, which will happen unless you really go out of your way to get rid of it all. And I just give it a tap with a kind of narrow-headed hammer that won't damage the masonite, and push it back to where I want it. And then I just finish the last two faces. Now, interestingly, my right, your left side of the piece that I'm putting in there, I can't figure out its top to bottom position yet. So I'm just levering it in, and there's obviously something that's going a bit wrong. Oh no, I tried to put the small one in, like a big dum-dum. So I slide this over top of the other one. I pop it in, but my left hand, there's obviously a bit of cardboard I'm fighting with there. My left side, you're right. I can figure out where that end goes. I just pull it up against a 20-inch board. Your left side there, my right, I don't know the height of it because it's got to butt up against the board that is still sitting on the bench. So I just start that, and you'll also see me, if I think about it ahead of time, you'll also see me, there it is, I pull out one of the screws, and it's the screw from the board that's already screwed in. I pull it out because I won't be able to get it past the screw when I angle it in like this. So I just get it out of my road. It doesn't need it anymore. The bottom one doesn't need it anymore. I figure it out. I line it up with the lines. And sometimes if the boards, your pine runs up against something, you have to do one end at a time and kind of work your way up the board to line it up. And that's what I'm doing in this case, to line it up to those lines. I'm just eyeballing it. And this one I've pulled down, and that corner is now tight on both sides of it. So I've pinned all the way around, which will clamp the glue in place, clamp the piece in place with the glue, and something there underneath it. And then I just finish nailing it, so I've pinned it on both sides. Once I'm done the pinning, then I double check that all the pins went flush, because when you sand it, if you don't, the pins will actually tear up your sandpaper, or just be, not fun on the hands. You can pull out the screws at this point. In fact, you need to. And once all the screws are out, then you can flush trim the face to the pine you just installed. So this is a bottom bearing flush trim bit, and I'm just flushing out the masonite face to the pine I just installed. And I do that on both sides. The other thing is, if those nails aren't flushed as you're running around with the router, you will actually grab the router on the face, so it'll kind of have a bumpiness to it. You can scratch up the base of your router. That's just kind of a journeyman router. It doesn't super matter if it gets a scratch in it. But if I then take that router and I go to something less resilient than masonite, so look at that. See, I'm hitting the thing as I'm hitting something again. So I'm kind of just powering through that, but I have to go back and I have to flush up those nails, and it's just easier if you flush them up in advance. Now, hardboard is pretty hard, so I'm not super worried, and these pins are teeny. I don't need a nail set to get it below the surface. I just flush it so it's at the surface, and move on with the rest of my day. If I do go below the surface with it, then I have to go and fill it afterwards, which, this is scenery. The closest person looking at this is 15 feet away. So it's not going under a high-def camera. It's going onto a live stage, and it'll look just splendiferous on the deck, and those pins won't bother anybody. If it were a different situation, if the audience were closer, if it were going in a house, if it had a high-def camera thing, it would be a different situation. So there's a 1/4-inch fillet, a round corner on the inside of that, because the router bits are round. And so I've just taken a square-edged file, and I'm just working it so that the square edges have, on this file, have, file on it. It's not just a flat piece of steel on the edges, and I just work into the corners to flush those up. because I need to, because a round corner and square things in there, I don't want to cope 3/8 inch window stop. So I clean that up and I do it on both sides, and then I move on to the next step, which is, well, I'll do the other side because you don't want to file it out. It'll tear the masonite. And once I've done those corners, I give her a wee sand and move on to installing the windows. Oh, I have to cut bits too. I have to cut bits. Giving this a wee sand because, you know, there's screw holes in it which are about to be covered up, so I don't really need to fill them for where this is going and what this door's life will be. And yeah, look at that. Sanders. Fancy. So exciting. So bored right now. So bored. I'm just going to leave that in because I think you're bored too. Look at that. Oh my God. No one sands like that. That's magical. I'm cutting, this is just some 1x3, actually offcuts from making a bunch of flats. And I have the fence set at 3/8 of an inch, and I have a 1/4 inch push stick, a 1/4 inch wide push stick there. And I actually have a finish blade on there, which I have because I don't want to be bothered. And I'm making it such thin material. I don't want to be bothered sanding this stuff afterwards. And yeah, rip blades are so much easier on solid wood. And but I mean, God, it's so thin and it's so soft. It doesn't really matter, and it leaves a nicer cut at the end of the day. The door itself is 1 3/8 inches thick, and I think I just wanted to make sure things were. I don't know what I was checking. Oh, I think I rough cut them in advance. Now I'm marking them, and because even when rough cut, I mean, this is not NASA level accuracy here. I now am doing the other side, so it's totally possible that one side of this is a mil or two bigger than the other side of it, height wise and width wise. So I'm literally marking each one and I'm arranging them so I remember for both sides where which piece goes. And once I've done that, and I'm so quick at the saw. Look at that. It's like magic. I'm done. And it was a bit of a long edit. Oh well, whatever. Now I'm going, no, I can't cut those because they have to be in place, so I don't have to hold them in place to figure out the top and bottom, which are sitting inside the verticals. This is the plexi. 3/16 acrylic, and I put 2 of these window stops on it, and I measure the height of it, and I move on to metric for this just because it's a very useful form of math. And I then figure out, okay, all that together is whatever it is, and then the whole door is whatever it is, and then the remainder, once I take one away from the other, is the space from the face to the first window stop. So the overall door minus the overall width of the plexi in the 2 pieces, then you divide that by 2, and then you take your square and you set it to that depth, and you just use the face of the wood as an alignment tool, and you just put yourself a pencil line, and it's like just a mil or so in behind the masonite. And there are so many ways you can trim out a window that this is just a very simple way of doing it and a very low profile way of doing it. The plexiglass is cut overall 1/8 inch smaller than the opening, and I put a little bit of glue on the stick. I flush up the top edge to the line, and then I pin it in place with those 7/8 inch 21 gauge pins. I also smooth out the glue, and if I did it off. Well, I didn't do it. Probably was just being lazy. I would recommend smoothing out the glue because if it's all in a bunch of drips or it's heavy in any places, what the squeeze out will actually make it hard for you to see the line and then line it up. So bad carpenter. I obviously wasn't behaving terribly well. I'm changing the depth on that because I still had the depth adjustment set to going through the meso and flushing to it. But with these, I want them to sink in fully. And since it's such a teeny head, the paint fills the hole in this situation. The plexi itself still has its poly on it, which keeps it from getting scratched. But in a situation like this, where I'm going to go and I'm going to paint the door afterwards, I just leave the poly on. And then once the door is fully painted, I go to the inside of the window stop, and I just score it right up against the window stop with an Olfa knife or a box cutter, a sharp one. And then I just peel the plastic away, so I don't have to be wicked concerned with paint getting on the actual window. And I also don't then have to mask it off. If you're doing used stuff, like you're pulling it out of the rack or whatever, and it doesn't have the poly on it, tape it. Tape it up when you get to the painting. It's totally worth it. And so I do both sides. I do the ends. I am apparently working just nice and relaxed today. I'm not really trying to win any records for speed. I mark the top and the bottom. I see if they're the same. And I can't remember what I come up with, but I cut all the pieces and move on from there. I'm putting the last window stop piece in. I think it had a pin in it already, or it's friction fit or something. It happily just sat there while I pinned it. I then gonna flip over the door, and as you can see, I have most of the window stop already in. I think I only have one left to do. Where am I? Oh yeah, that one's loose. And that one there is loose and blued. And that one. Apparently I started caring about spreading it out on the other side of the window. If you're going to use 18 gauge pins, you probably want to go bigger than 3/8 of an inch square. So it has enough meat around it to hold together. Because sometimes with a bigger, 18's not that big. With 18, 3/8 is a little big. I'm pretty close to done. The window's in place. The poly's still on the window. I'm just going to give this a bit of a quick sand because the leading edge of the masonite is a little sharp at that point. So I'm just giving it a bit of a whisk across the edge there and making it nice and pretty. And my God, this was a relaxed day for me. I was just all like, I'm just going to work through this. There was no giddy up in me at all. And there we go. There's your door. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.